the first time I really remember fleeing for my life, I was 6. And again, it was a very bad, violent fight to the point we ended up pushing the car out of my mom had a 1976 brown with tan interior Mustang and it was stick shift. And we pushed it out of the garage and we're letting it roll down the driveway before she started the car. So my dad wouldn't hear us running away.
Are you walking through a storm that feels like it will never end? Do you wonder if life's storms have stolen the beauty from your life for good? You're in the right place. My name is Heather, and like you, I've been through a storm or two and wondered if life would ever be beautiful again. Here we share warriors' words, stories of discovering beauty after battles, and the worth in your wounds. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome, warriors. Shelly Edwards Jorgensen attended Brigham Young University, where she was the first female to graduate with a degree in manufacturing engineering. After graduation, she moved back to her home state of Michigan and landed her dream job as a manufacturing engineer, starting off her 20-plus year career for the Ford Motor Company. A few years into her engineering career, she decided to go back to school to get her MBA. Shelly has spent over 30 years serving within her church congregation and community. She has always enjoyed serving others. Shelly enjoys woodworking and has amassed a workshop of her dreams. She also enjoys being outside in the fresh air, trail riding in her ATV, and enjoying the Great Lakes, boating and jet skiing. Shelly is happily married to her husband, Glenn, and is a stepmother, grandmother, and adored aunt. But before we hear Shelly's story, here is a review from Jen M. Thriving for sure. As someone who has suffered childhood abuse as well as an abusive marriage, and whose God-given calling is to help empower Christian women, I love the focus of this podcast. Yes, it is a journey to go from surviving to thriving, but we aren't alone, and it is possible. Thanks, Heather, for tackling an area that is so needed for women today. Wow, Jen, thank you so much for your support and your encouraging words. And you are 100% correct. None of us are alone. And I've said this in a couple other episodes, but I don't pick reviews based on the topics of my episode. I actually go in the order that I saw them on my review page. And I just think it has to be the Holy Spirit intervening, because what Jen was talking about is what we're going to be talking about today. And I love how the Holy Spirit just works. So, would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Your comments and your star ratings help people find the Warrior Words podcast, and it only takes a few minutes of your time. And please also share the show, whether you share just one episode or you share the whole general link for the show. Share it with someone who you think either would enjoy it or could benefit from the messages being shared here. And every time you share it, it expands our reach. And lastly, come join us in the Warrior Words Facebook community for inspirational stories, lessons learned, and beauty bombs. Go to facebook.com/groups/Warrior Words and request to join. A couple questions will pop up, just answer those, and I look forward to getting to know you in the Facebook group. Now, before we officially begin this episode, I am going to pause and add a warning. The events Shelly is going to discuss in this episode involve themes that may be upsetting to some people, and it is definitely not an episode for little ears. So please either listen to this later if your kids are around, or pop in some earbuds because it could be very disturbing. So grab a tissue and join me as Shelly recounts the story of her young life and how it led to beautiful ashes. Let's rock. Shelly, welcome to the Warrior Words podcast.
Hi, Heather. How are you?
I am wonderful and looking forward to our conversation today. So we have a little something in common. Sadly, we are a member of a club that not everybody wants to join, and that would be domestic violence experience. And our stories are a bit different. So I'd like it if you would share with our listeners your experience with domestic violence.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. And I'm wearing purple for domestic violence, and you're wearing, or you got purple behind you. And another reason why I wear purple when I do speaking events is because it was my mother's favorite color.
Oh, wow.
And so it kind of ties together with that. It's how I remember her. And so you mentioned that we have domestic violence in common. Fortunately for me, I don't have that in my marriage, but I grew up with it. So kind of to give a backstory on me is I had a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde alcoholic as a father. So for those that know what that is, I'm sorry. And basically, you never knew what you were going to get with my dad. He could be a super nice guy, helping me. Well, I'm an engineer, and I'm a woodworker. I basically could build a house myself, design and build a house by myself if I needed to or wanted to, and I basically have.
Wow.
And I've spent 20 years of my career in the auto industry building cars. So a lot of my love of building things in construction and design and all that are the good parts that I received from my dad. But my dad would get very violent when he drank. You just didn't know when that shoe was going to drop. So I grew up in this household of walking on eggshells and violence that culminated when I was 15 years old with my dad murdering my mother and burning our house down.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
And then things got worse.
And that is very difficult to imagine, but yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, and I am, I should have said this before we actually got started, but I am going to reiterate a warning that I gave at the beginning of the episode, and that is, the story, as you may have surmised from Shelly's last sentence, is not for little ears. So if you need to pause or come back or put the earbuds in, then I would suggest you do so. So, okay. So if you would like to, I guess, elaborate or continue with your story as you were growing up with this Jekyll and Hyde situation with your father.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of things I learned over time. And because when you're a child, you don't know any different. Your reality is your reality. And you just assume that everybody else has the same environment at home as you do.
Yeah.
And I domestic violence is a terrible beast in the sense that it touches every socioeconomic, every religious, every aspect of any kind of it doesn't matter who you are, I guess is what I'm saying. You can be in it and people not know. We haven't mentioned, but I ended up writing my memoir, and since that came out, I've had people that I grew up with and said, Shelly, I had no idea. Obviously, they found out after my mom's death because I grew up in Metro Detroit and we lived in a very affluent neighborhood at the time. And so, literally, the night of the fire, the ABC, NBC, CBS news channels in Detroit were at my house. I was watching my house burn on the 11 o'clock news. So, and then I read about my life for the next 2.5 years while living with my dad in the newspaper. So,
Imagine.
until that happened, people had no idea. And the people, like I said, have come up to me and said, Shelly, I wanted to be you. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I was one of the top athletes of my class. I was one of the top students of my class. And yet I'm living with this hell at home. And so, but I was trained. That's the other thing about domestic violence, especially for children, is you lose your voice because you're trained not to talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's a secret. And so, and then not only that, is you're not even allowed to voice your own concerns. I talk about in my book about how we would have these events that would happen where my dad literally would be trying to, he would, his most violent things would always end up in him strangling my mother. And so anybody that's that to that point, that you might as well be playing Russian roulette. If you are being strangled, that is the closest you can come to being killed. So I know nobody wants to hear get out, because that's, everyone wants to get out, but you feel trapped, and there's all this whole rigmarole about that whole trap, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are being strangled, you are in serious physical danger. That is, like I said, Russian roulette. And if you can't get out to save your life, I can assure you, your children will be better off if you do, because the road for my sister and I has been hell. And so back to what I was saying is, these arguments will culminate into literally my dad strangling my mother, my sister and I physically getting involved, breaking up these fights. And then the next morning, I wake up and my dad's making homemade hash browns and pancakes and warming up the freaking syrup in the little pitcher. We're talking like Vermont syrup, and we're sitting down, and I call them now the morning after breakfasts, because mom might have scratches around her neck or her tongue swollen because he tried to rip her tongue out, or or whatever. And here we are, like nothing happened. No apologies, no ability to voice your own fear or anything. This didn't happen.
Yeah.
You listened to, and witness this crime.
Yeah, and that's literally what it is. It was a crime, and that was the perfect description of the Jekyll and Hyde that you referenced in the beginning, for anybody who doesn't or hasn't lived with it. I was thinking earlier today about how I didn't even think about domestic violence growing up. It didn't occur to me. And then I didn't think about it as an adult when I entered my marriage. It just wasn't, it wasn't a phrase in my vocabulary. And I guess if you don't experience it, you don't think other people really experience it. And then what you see on TV and in the movies is so Hollywoodized that
Mhm.
I don't know, I guess maybe we don't really grasp that people actually live through things like you're describing.
Right. Well, and the other thing is it's that underlying current that, especially as a child, because you don't understand, oh, this is only happening when dad is drunk, and then mom says something that triggers his anger. Well, what is that? You don't know any of that as a kid.
Right, right.
Well, there's two stories that I talk about in, because in the book, because a lot of people assume, oh, well, they're too young to remember. Well, you're telling yourself a lie that's not true. I was about 4, and my parents dropped me and my sister off at my dad's parents' house. So my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa Edwards' house, because they had someplace to go, uh, wedding or whatever it was. I have no idea. I was 4. And so when they came back to pick us up, um, my mom came in, and she had her, it was nighttime, it was winter, so it's nighttime early, right? I live in in Detroit, so it's like it could be 5 o'clock and it's nighttime in the winter.
Right.
And so she had her sunglasses on, and when she took her sunglasses off, she had a black eye. And so she's poo-pooing this to my grandma Edwards, who is also a victim of my grandfather. It's generational.
Generational.
So
it is. Mm-hmm.
so my grandma Edwards certainly knew the signs, right? And my mom is kind of poo-pooing her, saying, I'm okay. And she
Mm-hmm.
tried to, so she tells this lie that when they left after dropping us off, she slipped and fell down the ice on the stairs. Okay. But as a 4-year-old, I knew that that was a lie
Because of everything you'd experienced so far.
because of everything I experienced so far. And so then I had started thinking to myself, well, why, if you hurt yourself, what kind of fear are you under in order to lie, to conceal?
Mm-hmm.
So I perceived all of that as a 4-year-old. So I knew as a 4-year-old I was in danger. I had no recourse, but
Mm-hmm.
I knew that intrinsically. I knew that at 4 years old.
4 years old, and you had to live with that in that house for 11 more years.
Well,
At least,
and then
yeah.
at least, yeah, it was my mom was murdered October 14th, 1985. That was my fall of my sophomore year of high school. My dad did not get arrested until February of 86. And he did not his trial was not until February to March of 88. So my sister and I had to live with him during that time. But and I tell another story about and back to the morning after breakfasts, and knowing you can't say anything, is about I was about 6. And well, I wasn't about 6, I was 6. It was the summer of 1976, because I remember what car we had. My parents both my parents both at different points in time worked for Ford. I actually worked for Ford. My husband's retired from Ford. I mean, I'm a Detroiter, so and and so we had newer cars, and so you kind of get on this cadence, and
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the car because this particular time, which was the first time I really remember fleeing for my life, I was 6. And again, it was a very bad, violent fight to the point we ended up pushing the car out of my mom had a 1976 brown with tan interior Mustang and it was stick shift. And we pushed it out of the garage and we're letting it roll down the driveway before she started the car. So my dad wouldn't hear us running away.
Mm-hmm.
And so we basically escaped, and my dad heard the car start and came running out after us and kind of ran into the street. And I thought we were gonna go somewhere safe, like to my grandma's house or something. And this was the first time this ever happened. And hours later, we're coming home. And basically my mom was just waiting till he passed out.
Mm-hmm.
And he had locked us out, but he was threatening to kill us all and burn the house down. And so that was a standard threat at least since I was 6, but at that time I was told that, you can't talk about this. Shh, no, you can't talk about this.
Right.
And so that threat of I'm going to kill you and burn the house down wasn't just my mother, it was to all of us. I don't even have a count of how many times I lived under that threat. And then it happened.
Would you care to take us back to that night when he followed through on that threat?
Yeah, I definitely can do that. And it's common. My mom would say, I don't want to be the first divorce in the family. Well, I'd rather you'd have been the first divorce than the first murder. But anyway, my mom started saying, well, we could leave, we could go get a condo or an apartment. We wouldn't be able to have exactly the same things that we have, blah, blah. And my sister and I, this is again, our trauma, my sister and I's trauma. We would beg her, no, Mom, no, we will protect you. And she would say, well, one of these days you're not going to be here and he's going to kill me. And that's where we were. And so Lisa and I were asking her to stay. I only had one friend at the time that had divorced parents. And, but now we're in this position and, that was a very hard thing for me to get over. And because of feeling like, I had a hand in convincing her not to leave. But, you're 21 years in. She was 21 years into abuse at that point. And I'm 11 years old. But that's what the 11-year-old was saying. Right. And because I loved my father. Yeah. I've never not loved my father. And I know that's hard for people to imagine because my father's a murderer. But he's also my father. And he had two sides to him. And he was the guy at the cottage taking us to the beach and letting us swim on his back like he was Shamu. That's the other part that makes it heart-wrenching as a child. Because it's the same when you're an adult, because you're in love with that person. When you get married, you didn't marry somebody you hated.
Right.
So but as a child, it's a different relationship. So my grandmother, she was born in Scotland, my mom's mom. And so she was out of town and she had left her car for my sister to drive. My sister was a senior, I was a sophomore. And so Lisa had driven grandma's car to school. And the reason why that matters is because the first 2 hours of the school day, Lisa was taking an advanced office procedures class at a different high school in our city. And so normally she would take the bus to and fro.
Okay.
And this day, because she had my grandma's car, she drove over there. Well, on the way back, two girls from her class and her stopped at, in Michigan, we call them party stores. They're basically convenience stores, kind of like a liquor store / 7-Eleven.
Okay.
And so they stopped at this party store on the way back to school. And the two girls that were with my sister shoplifted beer. Well, they weren't going to buy it because they were seniors in high school, right?
Right. Right.
They all three got arrested. And so my dad was actually on an afternoon shift, and he had been on an afternoon shift for several years. And so he was the parent that was home when my sister got arrested and my mom was at work. And so he's the one who had to go bail my sister out from jail, got woken up from sleeping. And so I'm at school hearing the rumor mill that my sister got arrested. I'm like, oh no. Again, I am trained. I understand that these are red flags, and this could cause a very stormy sea. And I know these things already.
Right.
I don't have to, these are warnings. So I'm like, oh crap. And I never, and I knew my sister came back to school, but I never saw her. And both of us were 3-sport athletes. And so I had basketball practice and she had basketball practice, but I was on junior varsity. She was on varsity. Her practice was right after school and mine was after hers. So I had to leave on the bus to go home, and I was getting a ride back up. That was the normal routine. So I never saw my sister. I'd take the bus home. When I get home, and I knew this happened, but I don't know any details.
Right, because you haven't seen her. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I walk in to the kitchen. He was making meatloaf and he's in his bathrobe and starts talking to me about what happened that day with my sister, and then starts crying. And I'm like, oh no, I don't, this is not emotion of my father's I'm aware of how to deal with. So, and he's asking me, well, where did I go wrong as a parent? Well, I'm not going to answer that one.
That's a minefield. Yes.
so I basically vanish upstairs to do homework and get ready. And as part of my normal routine, I would call my mom to coordinate rides and whatnot, because my friend was coming to pick me up and take me up to the school. And so I'm just trying to coordinate the whole carpooling thing, which was normal. But again, my sister had the car, so I didn't know what the story would be there. And so when I talked to my mom, blah, blah, about the carpooling, I called her at work. And then she asked me if my dad left yet. This is when I wish I knew how to lie. But I didn't lie. And I said, well, Dad hasn't left for work yet. And so, but my dad was still in his robe drinking Manhattans. I knew work wasn't happening. And so she asked to talk to him again, because I'm reading the tea leaves and I know the storm is brewing. This is back in the day I could have listened on the handset, and I wish I would have, because then I would have had both sides of the whole conversation.
Right.
But so I call down to the kitchen, and my dad picks up the phone in the kitchen, and I hang up in the master. But then I come immediately downstairs and I'm sitting on a bench right outside so I could hear my dad the kitchen, so I could hear my dad's conversation. So my dad proceeds to tell my mom that my sister got arrested at school and why. And this is where it got weird. Because now my dad is getting mad that my mother is getting mad.
Okay.
So because he had promised my sister that he wouldn't say anything to my mother until the three of them can sit down. And so and he felt like because my sister really just was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But, and this is another kind of believe it or not, is most of the time my mom was the one doing the grounding in the punishment sentences for like things that my sister and I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's mainly because from the time I was like 10, my dad was working afternoons. And so that was when I knew I had a problem. I knew for sure I had a problem because of this conversation. And my dad is being angry. And obviously, any mother is going to be upset if they know that their teenager has been arrested, especially for that. So I go upstairs. I'm still trying to hide. And the next thing you know, my ride is late. My mom, I hear the garage door open when I'm upstairs, like avoiding my father. And I'm like, oh crap, I need to create a distraction. I need to assess this situation. What is she doing home? Because she normally would come right from work to pick me up at practice. And so I hurry down the stairs trying to think of a distraction. My dad is now an hour plus later, still in his bathrobe, sitting at the built-in desk at the kitchen, still drinking Manhattans. So it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And so my mom says to me as she walks in, well, if I knew you were going to be here still, I would have, taken you to practice. And I'm like, well, Sabrina's late. And oh, mom, I got this geometry that I need some help with. My mom was the one that usually helped me with my homework. Total bullshit. I didn't care about getting help with my homework. I needed to create a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And I also needed to see what kind of interaction there was going to be. And what I'm trying to show her this geometry that I'm pretending that I need help with. 5 feet away, my dad's sitting there, still drunk in his bathrobe, but they didn't talk. And I'm thinking, okay, well, looking at my watch, Lisa should be home any minute. Next thing you know, the horn honks out front. It's my ride. So I give my mom a kiss. I say I love you, and I run out the door. And I get up to the gym. My sister's there. She's not coming home. And then about 30 minutes later, I'm running out to get a drink, and I nearly like smash into my friend Carolyn that lives two houses down, and her mom. She says, we're here to pick you and Lisa up. There's been a fire at your house. So we immediately get in the car. And so she's trying to say, well, your dad's at our house, the fire department's there, everything is, the fire's under control, blah, blah, blah. And so we're pulling out and we're driving this stupid 80s song, The Roof, the roof, the roof is on fire. I don't need no water, let the MFer burn. That's playing on the radio.
Wow.
And I'm having this conversation. Lisa's singing the song because you're thinking, oh, okay, well, I guess it's a kitchen fire, whatever. You're not thinking anything serious, right? So as that song is playing, Lisa's singing along to it. I'm asking, and Mrs. Idell is telling me how everything's under control. So I ask her, like, well, where's my mom? And she looks in the rearview mirror and she says, oh, she's not home from work yet. And as soon as she said that to me, I hit Lisa in the leg. And I look at her and I say, Mom was home when I left. Whew. Both of us in that moment, that very moment, both of us knew Mom was dead and Dad killed her. Because we had heard 1,000 times, I'm going to kill you and burn this house down. And we heard, I don't know how many times, one of these days you're not going to be here and he's going to kill me. So her and I knew without even speaking. And then that's when the denial sets in. You don't want to believe that. Mm-hmm. So we arrive to our neighborhood. I said earlier that I lived in a very affluent neighborhood in Farmington Hills, and so when we arrived, all the major news networks were there. The streets were shut down. The entire neighborhood's walking their dog, and we were taken immediately to the Zidells. I snuck myself out there because I wanted to know what was going on. There's, now it's dark. I literally only have on my practice jersey, my high tops, my stupid polyester practice jersey shorts, and it's October in Detroit. So I'm crouching out. I make my way to the next door neighbor's front yard. There was like this group of like a big pine tree and a few bushes that I was hiding in, and I had a vantage point that I could see my front door, and I watched the body bag come out before they even told us. And so then I made my way back to the Zidells, and then the fire chief and investigators and came in to tell us that my mom was dead. And so my dad's story was that he was gone getting heating supplies for the cottage, and he came back and the house was on fire. And so I wanted to believe his story. That's what I needed to believe.
Right.
But I knew it wasn't true. So that night we went to my aunt and uncle's house, my dad's brother. And by the time we got there, because this was hours and hours, we didn't get there until right before the 11 o'clock news started. And, there it is. My house literally ablaze. There was a freelance photographer who was a volunteer fireman that was in the area. So he actually had live photos and video of our house on fire. And so they're playing that on the 11 o'clock news. They're announcing that they have a dead 50-year-old woman, which now I'm older than my mother was. And that there's suspicion with the fire. So the night one, they knew it was suspicious. But then it turns into a complete debacle after that. So, I mean, when I say, and then things got worse, things did get worse. My sister and I had to, so the next morning, the next morning, we have to go to the Farmington Hills police station to be questioned. Okay, well, that's kind of weird, but okay. They're trying to figure out what happened. So you're not putting two and two together. But, and I'm the last one home. Okay. So I'm the only one that can basically point out that my dad's story is bullshit and give a timeline. And so
no
we
pressure
show
there.
up.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing, Heather. I mean, again, I'm in this quandary. I just lost my home and my mother, all my worldly possession. I literally have nothing,
Right.
Zero.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother's gone, who's my anchor. And you're spinning like this has got to be a dream. This has got to be a nightmare that I'm going to wake up from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so surreal. You can't even, I can't even describe it. And so you're in like this fog anyway. So we show up at this police station and my dad is an attorney there. Okay, well, if you're just, again, I'm 15, I'm not putting all this together, right? but so he puts his attorney in when I'm getting questioned by the police. Now, first of all, the police officers didn't ask me any of the correct questions. Zero questions. I answered exactly what they asked.
Mm-hmm.
But because I'm conditioned that all of this is not to be talked about,
right,
I'm not going to be forthcoming with any information about a history of abuse. But if you're a police officer and you're questioning the last person home, and you have, I mean, even if you had zero other information, zero, you have a dead 50-year-old woman burned beyond recognition, which I later found out that she was so badly burned. Again, I gathered all my information over the next 2.5 years by reading in the newspaper or overhearing conversations that I wasn't supposed to hear. My mother's body was so badly burned that her arms and legs were detached, and she had a spot the size of a dime on the back of her head that wasn't completely charred. So they don't know the cause of death. Okay, but you have a dead 50-year-old woman. This is the next morning. You have a dead 50-year-old woman, and that the fire inspectors are already presuming this is arson because of what they saw on the scene. Now, why in the hell are you not asking a child that grew up in this environment any questions about domestic violence? Zero questions. The first autopsy came back as natural causes.
Oh, wow.
Which it wasn't.
There's no
way. No,
I'm not a
science.
I'm not a forensic professional.
No, but there ends up being an exhumation. Warner Spitz, who was the coroner that was involved with JFK and MLK, ended up getting involved. And there was 3 different autopsies done. But the second autopsy is like, well, no, you missed that there's blood on the lungs. And so the defense tried to argue, oh, well, that was caused from the first autopsy. And then the experts are like, no, a corpse doesn't bleed. That was, so basically he stabbed her and then burned her. So after that, when I say things got worse, is my dad wasn't arrested right away. So this was October. My dad then moves us into my best friend Linda's house, which is on the hill overlooking our house. So now is it weird for me to be at Linda's house because I basically spent every day of my childhood from 3 years old on to, to whenever at her house. I spent more time at her house playing than I did at my own. But I can look out my window and see my boarded up house that oh, by the way, I helped build. I was 3 years old and I was carrying bricks. And I built the screened-in porch with my dad. I built the bridge over the creek with my dad. I helped finish the basement with my dad. I learned how to wire outlets when I was 6 years old. So this wasn't just something. But what made matters worse is now I'm having reoccurring nightmares about leaving. And then one night my dad hands me the keys. Again, it's November in Michigan. It's cold and dark and scary because there's lots of trees. He sends me to our house to get canned goods out of the basement for dinner. So now I have no necessity to ever go to a haunted house because none of them would compare to the fear that I had going to my own home. So I put the key in the door. I'm assaulted by the smell. You can't describe the smell if you haven't been in a house fire, and it was severe. The propane gas grill in the back had exploded, and plus my dad had poured accelerant everywhere. And so, I mean, even in my bedroom, stuff had melted together. Like I'm talking like jewelry, and the TV in the master bedroom had kind of like, it was flat, that it melted. That's how much heat. So there was a lot of heat and smoke and water, and and so this is my first time I'm going to the house by myself in the dark, and there's no electricity. There's wires with bulbs, and I had to I'm trying to fumble around to find a switch, and now I have to go to a basement that I hated it going to normally. And so now I'm crunching through charcoal and glass and debris, and I'm making my way down these stairs to get some damn corn and beans. And so that was the start of him sending me over there. And so now I'm regularly having to go over there, and now now I'm reading about things that are happening. I don't know what's happening. My dad hasn't been arrested. Now he's drinking nonstop, and he hasn't been arrested. I'm having to go over there all the time, so I'm starting to try to do my own investigation. I'm in the family room, and I find my mom's glasses in a pile of soot. So I'm like, oh, this must be where her purse. This is, and I'm trying to piece together what the hell happened that day. And it was a nightmare. And there's so many experiences that I had in doing that. And then my only solace was sports. I blow my back out for the first time in December. So October was that. My dad starts sending me to the house. I'm looking out my back window. It's just December. I blow my back out. My parents started going to Mexico annually to the same place at the same time. I think I was in first or second grade. They used to go to Acapulco to the same resort, and every year it was them and some of their friends, but then when they got down there was always the same people. And so when I was 11, that was our Christmas present that year. Lisa and I got to go on that trip. It was the first time I was on a plane and whatever. And I ended up getting molested on that trip. Because that's another thing domestic violence does to children is you can't talk about that abuse, which means you don't talk about others. And so I got molested by an acquaintance of my parents on that trip. And um and so now February comes along. Well, January, my dad surprises us and says that he's gotten tickets for us to go to Mexico in February on this trip. I wasn't really super interested because that had already happened to me there. And oh, by the way, to back up, the last family vacation we had before my mom died, which was in July, we went to England for a month because, like I said earlier, my grandmother was born in Scotland and we had family there.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up getting raped on that trip.
Oh my goodness.
So that's a whole different story. I didn't even tell anybody that that assault happened to me until I was in the middle of writing my book. I was 45 years old and had decades of trauma therapy. But I already talked about the molestation, but I didn't talk about that because I'm 15 years old. I'm drinking beer for the first time legally in a bar, and I'm dancing with the guy who I was interested in dancing with. And he was like in his 20s. And, we go outside because we're hot and he wanted to kiss and I was okay with that, but that's not what he wanted to end with. So that happened and I said nothing to anybody. And so now it's February and my dad's bought us tickets and my sister and I come home. And at this point, my dad's not leaving the house. He's constantly drunk and he's taken a leave of absence from work. And we show up and there's a plate of spaghetti dumped in the sink because my dad cooked. He did cook usually. And there's a plate of spaghetti dumped in the sink and his car is in the garage. We're like, what the hell? And we're thinking, well, maybe his friends came and took him out. So it was a Friday. And so Lisa and I went to the boys' basketball game and a party afterwards. And we were coming home at our curfew to the answer machine blinking and the phone ringing. Well, it was my aunt, my dad's sister-in-law on the phone. And so Lisa's on the phone and I'm listening to the answer machine. The answer machine is saying it's my dad calling from jail saying he'd been arrested. And it's my aunt calling to say your dad's been arrested and you guys need to go here in the morning to go bail him out and post his bond. So far be it from anybody to come stay with the two teenagers that are going to have to now bail their father out for murdering their mother and burning their house down that they're looking at.
Right.
so we go and we bail him out the next day. And that was difficult to say the least. And we had to come up with 10% of $50,000 is what all his bond was, by the way, which whatever. But so we didn't have that kind of money. So there was this big rigmarole around the money, and my aunt and uncle came and picked us up. It was an ice storm that morning. We had to drive to the county courthouse, to go bail him out and then sit squished in the back seat. And that was awful. And so my aunt and uncle leave. And the first thing out of my dad's mouth was, well, now they'll be coming for the money. My dad's trial wasn't until my senior year. Well, so we had we had the house that was burned that hadn't started being repaired yet. And then we had our cottage, which my dad had even before my parents were married. And then we were renting Linda's house. Well, they end up selling that. So yeah, at the end of the school year, my sophomore year, my dad moved to the cottage because they sold Linda's house, and he had already started. We were supposed to move into a condo at the before school started the next year. And so my dad just moved up to the cottage for the summer, and my sister and I just were gypsies. We just we would stay up north sometimes. We'd stay down and with friends or my grandmother or whatever. We really kind of were gypsies because we didn't really want to be at home.
I can understand that.
And so we were trying to avoid home as much as possible anyway. And so by the time school was going to start, the condo wasn't available. So my dad bought a fixer-upper kind of to flip time. And again, I'm reading about my life in the newspaper. And I mentioned I was interviewed that day after. Now, I know by the time they had arrested my father, they knew there was domestic violence. Okay. My sister and I did have to give a deposition for the insurance company about contents, which was another laborious, horrible process. But the police never talked to us again. They never called us back in for another interview. So I eventually moved myself out. My best friend that I basically was at the time, Sabrina, her and her family moved back to California at the end of my junior year. Right before senior year started, they invited me, that said I could come. And so I did the hardest thing possible for me, which was leave, because I couldn't handle it anymore. My dad had already stolen my college money to buy the condo that we are now living in, because I got into a fight about I tried to stop him from killing my sister one night, and he had bought me a convertible Mustang for my 17th birthday, and because I slammed him into the countertop and stopped him from killing my sister, he's like, I'm going to take that GD car away from you. I'm like, fine, do it. I'll just buy another one with I'm a teenager. I'll get another with my own money. And he goes, what money? And I'm like, what? And that's when I found out my dad took all of my college money and Lisa's college money to buy this condo. So I moved to California. My sister moves out and we're 2.5 years later is his trial from when this whole thing starts. So he finally, after I moved out and Lisa moved out, this is now fall of my senior year, he does go to rehab and get sober, but he's still an asshole at this point. He's trying not to be, and sometimes he is and sometimes he isn't. And I shouldn't say that at that time when he was sober, he wasn't being. I'm in California now. Now it's February, and and this whole time I'm trying to convince myself to believe my dad's story. Okay, you have to remember that I'm trying my best to that's got to be my truth. And so I get this phone call from my dad and say, Shelly, this is a Tuesday. Okay, now mind you, 2.5 years almost. So 2 years, 4 months, whatever the Grimble detail is there. The cops never talked to me again. So I have no expectation that I'm going to be testifying in court. Okay.
Right.
So now I'm living in California. My dad calls. He says, Shelly, you need to appear in court on Monday. You need to come home.
6 days.
Like,
you get 6 days notice.
I'm like, what? Okay. He's like, I got you a plane ticket. You're flying out on Friday, blah, blah. I'll pick you up at the airport. Okay. So he picks me up at the airport and I go home with him. And the next morning, it's a Saturday morning. I have to testify Monday morning. I don't even know for what or who or what. And I'm still wrapping my mind around that I'm going to have to sit on the stand.
Mm-hmm.
So this is back in the day before Google Maps. He gives me an address and gives me the location and I look on the map and I make my way, sends me by myself. And so I show up at this lawyer's office and so I sit down and I have no idea why I'm there. None. I'm assuming it's one of his lawyer's associates because now, mind you, I haven't seen his lawyer since that day at the police station. And I knew his name was Nick, but this was a woman. So she sits down, or I sit down, and the first thing she does is she shows me this picture of my living room. Now, our living room had a vaulted ceiling that went from 1 story to 2. There was a balcony that came down and a circular staircase. So if you came down the circular staircase, you're overlooking the entire living room. Plus, there's a window in the far corner of the living room, a small window and there's a little credenza that I would sit on to look out that window because it would right angle up the street that you could see your ride coming. And so she's showing me this picture. There's a stain. You can't even see my arms, but huge,
Mm-hmm.
huge stain in the middle of the living room carpet. That is clearly blood. It was brownish red. Okay, clearly blood. Mm-hmm. And the carpet was like the color of the wall behind me here. And she says, was this stain in the carpet before you left? No. She's like, would you have seen it? I'm like, yeah, I would have seen it. And I'm pointing to where I was. And then she's like, well, the night of the fire, this picture was taken. But when the crime lab went back to take a sample to send that to the crime lab, the investigators going back, the carpet was missing and the padding. Now, Heather, this is an active crime scene. And we're talking about a 20 by 20 minimum size room full of furniture. It's not a rug, it's a carpet and the pad. How do you get a room that size, carpet, out of an active crime scene?
I'm perplexed.
Yeah. Sketch City. So it was missing. And I'm like, I didn't even know that exists. And now all of a sudden, and then she starts, and then I realize I'm at the prosecutor's office. She's prepping me to be the witness for the prosecution. I'm staying with my father. And I'm having to disarm myself from the denial that was keeping me safe and sane.
Yeah.
And again, I'm a minor. I'm 17.
Right.
And so now she's talking about that story about being 6 years old and fleeing and the threats. I'm like, what? And who told her this? I've never talked about this before in my life.
Mhm.
You're going to ask me this in open court in front of my father, and I have to go home with him? And every single other question. And
Mhm.
I'm reeling at this point, going, holy crap. How does she know this happened? How does she know that happened? How does she know this happened? And so clearly they had a full picture of the domestic violence, but yet they never came and asked us.
Mm.
Before 2 days before, I'm sitting on a stand in front of a jury in a courthouse full of reporters. So now I'm realizing, well, crap. She's going to use me to be the star witness to prove premeditated murder.
I cannot believe that about you realizing in the middle of that conversation that you're sitting in the prosecutor's office. What fear you must have had when you made that realization, because you just mentioned that you had to go home that night to stay with your father, knowing all of this. Wow. But I think that's honestly a good place to stop with this episode. And I apologize to the listeners, but we're going to have to come back for next week, and we're going to do a part 2 where Shelly is going to share with us what happened in court, and then about her healing journey and how she's thriving today. So thank you, Shelly, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thanks. Thanks, Heather.
Shelly's story does not end when her father is arrested. In some ways, parts of it are just beginning. One overarching theme stood out to me as she recounted her story. People living with domestic violence, whether it's from a parent or a spouse, have their voices stolen. As a child, Shelly reminded us, you're stuck. You love your parents. You may be scared of one of them. You may be scared for the other one. You may be explicitly told that what happens in the family stays in the family. You may be threatened. Or it may be implied or manipulated somehow that this is something that other people shouldn't know. You may get morning after breakfasts or some other treat that may be a form of buying your silence. Or maybe you see your other friends' happiness and feel there's no way they would understand or even believe you. So, for all the parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles listening, please teach your children with your words and your actions to find a trusted adult, even if it's not you. Find someone they can talk to and let them know it's okay to talk about anything with that person, as long as it's true. And if you are in an abusive situation, please get help. Find your own trusted adult. Tell the truth. Get help. Your life and or your children's lives may just depend on it. Shelly and I will be back next week with more of her incredible story. So until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.